Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Ronnie, currently in the TVC teaching and learning role. And listening to the VC there has made me realize he should have been on our panel. We may still draw you in, VC. So it's been a year, guys. Yes, November 2022, since the release of generative AI in the form of ChatGPT. What do we know? Well, the VC's covered most of it. It can provide step-by-step solutions to mathematical problems, write code, generate lesson plans, draft emails, produce stories, music lyrics, and social media posts. Therefore, it's not surprising that many of us in academia actually were so excited, I think, about its potential and its potentially positive influence on productivity and efficiency. On the other hand, I think ChatGPT generated a lot of debate around integrity issues in higher education, including concerns about plagiarism and cheating in and outside the classroom. Other views suggest that the shift demands a reevaluation of the role of human expertise alongside emergent technologies, rather than imposing outright bans or restrictions on tool use or trying to detect AI-generated text. So, where to from here? I am joined today by some wonderful colleagues in our session entitled Assessment Just Got More Complicated, to answer some questions and perhaps pose questions of their own related to the use of generative AI in higher education. Joining me today, Dr. Kyle Abrams from ChemEng, Associate Professor Adish Budri from Information Systems, Professor Michelle Kuttel from Computer Science, and Associate Professor Shannon Moreira from Humanities as the Deputy Dean undergrad there. So please, colleagues, join me and we'll try and get this. We'll try and answer some of the things that have also been posed by the VC today. Okay, good. Okay, so guys, I'm going to start off with, I think, a fairly tame question, which is, what do you think are the concerns in higher education right now about the use of AI? And what are your views regarding those concerns? So maybe, Adish, you kick us off on that.
Thanks, Prof. Very interesting question. And coming from an information systems background, we looked very much at, I'd say, the behavioral side of technology. And I think the VC actually highlights it very nicely. It's a question of what for who. And I think the higher education environment sits on a bit of a precarious fence at the moment because we serve many masters. There's obviously the knowledge and knowledge development, information sharing environment, which is the traditional university. But what it's also evolved into is also serving as a pipeline of, I don't want to say labor, but of workers going into the work environment, our graduates walking out into the world and pretty much running those structures that are out there. And so the question lies now with the advent of something like artificial intelligence, which allows us to actually deal with really complex issues, complex problems within the teaching and learning environment. And takes over that component, so where does it leave us? Where does it leave us from an agency perspective? Where does it leave the student from an agency perspective? And I think what we need to really do is, as the VC highlighted, is look at it as an opportunity to also step back and look at our pedagogies, look at our teaching and learning strategies. However, and we'll put this big however up there, with the current environment of higher education globally being defunded, with stretches in resources, the big question comes up of, well, how do we actually do this? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer, but those are the type of questions that we do need to be asking ourselves. So like Prof. Ronnie said, there's so many positives that come with it, but there's also lots of areas that are big unknowns at the moment, which obviously are quite scary, and the big question then arises, well, how do we take this almost one step at a time?
Thanks, Sadesh. Shannon, maybe you have thoughts.
Sure. Thank you. So, I mean, I think the disciplinary differences are also very interesting in this setting. So, higher education generally, obviously, has a particular response, particular responsibilities. All of us have particular graduate attributes, etc., etc. But beyond that, I think there's quite a lot of nuance in terms of what those graduate attributes are and how we teach for it and how we assess for it. So the humanities, as I'm sure many of you know, had a particular moral crisis, I suppose, is a phrase, over the rise of something like ChatGPT, largely because of our forms of assessment. So traditionally, humanities and social sciences is very essay-based in how it is that we assess. And so what that had meant is a year of people having to really seriously rethink assessment models, and centrally around this question of what are we assessing for, which I think is actually a fabulous moment of opportunity. So at UCT, over the last 5 years or so, assessment models in the humanities have already shifted massively away from the exam model, exactly because of that question, what are we assessing for? But the move away from exams and the rise of something like ChatGPT obviously then causes a whole other set of concerns, because here we all are with our very carefully designed coursework models, and now can we be sure that the students are actually doing the work in those coursework models? So those are the kind of questions that that the particular disciplinary perspective has been grappling with. But I really think the answers, which obviously are not fully in place yet, but the answer comes from exactly that same question of what is it that we're assessing for. And so if we think about this as an opportunity to use AI as a learning model, as support for students, I don't think we can run away from it. It's here. We can't necessarily tell that our students have been using it, so we have to design our assessments much more carefully and think really critically and carefully about what it is that we are, what are we trying to teach? And often in the humanities, what we're trying to teach is critical literacies, and sort of understanding AI really falls within that. Thanks.
Thank you. Kyle, your thoughts?
Maybe I can...
No, we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. So I think... is it easier? It is.
We can hear you.
Oh, you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think one of the big concerns for me particularly is AI literacy, and how our students and I think staff members are actually using these various tools. So as you mentioned, last year ChatGPT dropped and there wasn't really an instruction manual, and people just go out and use it and put all kinds of interesting prompts in. It spits something out, and people are unfortunately taking that at face value and thinking, these are facts. These are things we can just use and put directly into solutions. And I think people think of ChatGPT and all of these various AI tools as almost these oracles, because they can be extremely convincing. So I think as much as AI literacy is extremely important, I think there is some good news there. And that is that domain-specific knowledge isn't going anywhere. And if anything, it's probably going to be more important, because you, as an expert in your field, will be able to scrutinize what comes out of these tools a lot more effectively than someone who doesn't actually, who doesn't actually know what's happening in that field. So I think it's very important that we are aware of the concerns and of the obvious ethical concerns, but I think it's important that we teach our students and our staff members how to use these tools and how to use these tools effectively.
Thanks, Kyle. So, how about a view from computer science then?
Yes, so in computer science, our first and primary concern was plagiarism. Well, I think we're talking about solutions later, are we?
Yeah,
yes?
we are.
Yeah, so I'll save that. But the other, so plagiarism, huge issue, very worried about students not actually knowing how to program and just getting ChatGPT to do it. But also picking up on what Carl said, the fact that ChatGPT lies a lot and it can actually convince you as a researcher. You know, I asked about my area, which is actually computational chemistry, got all these references and I was like, how could I not know these? And then I realized they were all fake. And then I actually broke ChatGPT because I said this one was wrong. So it fixed that one. So then I said another one was wrong. And it asked me which one. So I said, you tell me. And then it broke. So that's a worry. Mathematicians are worried because it comes up with proofs that look plausible. And you have to be quite a sophisticated mathematician to pick up the errors. So, you know, it can be useful if you're an expert, but the problem is our students aren't experts. And it's going to look very plausible to a second-year student in maths. This proof that's not a proof, just looks like a proof. Yeah.
So, Shannon, I want to pick up on some of the issues that you raised. If the intention of assessment is in fact to reveal students' thinking processes, their competencies, and other qualities that we outline in our learning outcomes or in our syllabi, how do you think AI can be harnessed in that regard?
Sure. One of the things we've spoken about today is all of the different levels of what it is that we do as a university. And I think that that can be a huge challenge in that a lot of the time we're pulled in multiple directions. But a big part of what we do is we are producing graduates who should be capable of producing new knowledge, right? That's sort of the center of what it is that we do. So not just graduates who can reproduce the knowledge of others, but graduates who really have the critical skills to find out something new about the world, and to tell it in a particular genre. And obviously we really need to scaffold this as we go, but I really firmly believe that what we should be doing is positioning our students as knowledge makers from the very beginning of their degrees. So as researchers, essentially, and putting those skills into place. And I feel that AI, at least as we've been using it in some spaces across the humanities and social sciences, can really be an ally in that rather than an enemy. So colleagues in humanities in the film and media department who are here today and are presenting at this conference have been conducting a really big study with students across the country to look at how are students using various forms of AI. And obviously, there's lots and lots of findings, but the one that really stood out for me is that a lot of the time, this is not something that's being done maliciously by students, an idea of kind of like trying to cheat the system in a particular way. And so one of the earliest lessons that we teach students in the humanities is that you need to learn to read before you need to learn to write. And I think we're finding that AI is being used a lot of the time by students and then by careful teachers who are now sort of recognizing how we do this to support exactly those skills. So particularly in a context in a country where we have many second language English speakers coming into a university with really deep academic English and suddenly being thrown into it, knowing how to ask questions of AI, how to sort of unpack readings. You can have a tutor in AI, but again, the digital literacies, the critical literacies, we need to support our students in that so that they're asking the right sorts of questions. And then I think there's been, in my mind, a very unintended side effect, which is that because AI is a worry, one of the things that's happening is people are designing their classrooms quite differently in order to ensure that students are doing much more active learning, which is excellent. It's a great side effect. But it also means that people are thinking quite carefully, I hope, about the fact that often we set too much reading for students, and there's an assumption that the more you set, the sort of more expert they will become. But when you're teaching sort of critical literacies, when you're teaching an orientation to thinking about the world, to unpacking the world, actually less is more. And the recognition that students are using AI tools to break down reading so that they can come into their tutorial prepared has actually got people going, okay, well, let's just pull back a little bit. We'll set less work and we'll do it in the classroom with the students. And that's not through AI as a tool, but it's a very useful side effect. Yeah.
Adish, your thoughts on kind of harnessing the potential of generative AI?
Thanks. And I'm going to piggyback off what Shannon said. 2 examples. The first one, my dad used to teach accounting many years ago. And he told me about the point where there were huge protests in the country, particularly from mathematics teachers and accounting teachers, around the use of calculators in the classroom. And they forbid it. There's like no way. Students are not going to learn if you have this device in front of you. And so that passed, and then we landed up with Google, and we landed up with generally search engines, which eventually devolved down into Google. And exactly the same thing. You shouldn't be using this. Google Scholar, Wikipedia, we do not reference from Wikipedia. Remember that. Whatever you do, do not reference from Wikipedia. And so a lot of the things that, and it's still very, very true, but at exactly the same time, the idea is we needed to learn to become more critical of what's up there. And we needed to learn to become, and when I say we, I mean we as humanity, not just as educators, not just as students. And exactly the same thing, I think, applies within the generative AI environment, where it's still pretty fledgling technology. Fledgling technology has been around since Turing, so the 1950s, in terms of the concept. But from ChatGPT, ChatGPT it's been released to the public fairly recently. And so all of these things, it will evolve, and so too will the role in our sort of environment. And I just want to end with one thought. I won't be too controversial about it, but I will say the big question around assessments is, in a history class, do we as educators want to teach students that 6 million odd people were killed in the Holocaust? Or do we want to teach students that this shouldn't be repeated and we should learn from those lessons?
Thanks, Adish. We'll go to you.
I think the question, so the first thing is, trying to step around the AI at the moment. And I think we don't really know where it's going yet. So at the moment, it's just patch jobs. And so we've actually had more closed pracs where you're in a lab and you can't access anything. Causes huge stress with the students, not the best way to do it. I've also set assignments where it's very hard to do it through ChatGPT, but it's going to catch up. So anything graphical, they have to plot graphs, not so good at that anymore, or interpretation. But I think assignments get harder. And a confession is that I used ChatGPT to help me set a second year assignment, because I know nowadays I can't repeat assignments at second year. Never mind the repeaters in the class, they're all going to find, it's on the web within, half an hour of me putting it out there, the assignment, trying to find solutions. So my assignments get more specific and more complex. So I think we're teaching harder work, I really do. But I actually use ChatGPT to give me ideas for a new assignment, which is great when you're at that edge of like, what do I set? So I just think, give me some ideas. Not unlike those ideas, give me. And then it gave me the kernel of idea, which I then adapted for my assignment. So I think it's very nice in a way of brainstorming with ChatGPT, and I'm sure students use it the same way.
Thank you. Carl.
So I think one of my favorite descriptions about ChatGPT and the AI tools is that it's merely a stochastic parrot, which is a bit tongue-in-cheek. But I think the important thing is we're not training parrots at this institute. We're training thinkers, And with assessment, I think it's not so much the final answer that's really important. It's about how they got there, how they've understood the problem, rephrased the problem, and set up the problem, and then proposed various solutions to that particular problem. And I think that AI is going to assist in that process, because I think it's very difficult for you to give AI a very complex problem and to have it solve it in one prompt. You're probably going to have to iterate and give it a few different prompts, and eventually you might get to something that you're potentially happy with, but you've still got to mishmash it and put it together in some kind of logical format. So I think from that perspective, I think it just helps with instead of assessing for recall and memory, it's really assessing about the application. The VC alluded to this in the beginning. And then the other thing that I think is really important is there is a problem, I think, with scope creep, particularly in our various syllabuses. And this is something that could potentially assist with scope creep. So it's not necessarily important to understand, all of the elements that go into a solution. And as an example, in our chemical engineering curriculum, we've now incorporated a data science block. So I know you mentioned that you're assessing for coding in computer science, but for us, coding is the tool that helps you get to the answer. So if the students can use ChatGPT to get a piece of Python code that at least gets them started, it helps them get over that hurdle. And I think we had a very successful trial this year where we gave them, data-heavy tasks for the students to solve, but very few of the students actually had any formal training or education in Python, but they were able to develop solutions in Python, even though it wasn't instructed in our course at all. So it can help actually, get over that hurdle of scope creep and potentially help us deal with that problem, that the scope of our work is actually growing. And this is how we deal with it.
Thanks. Carl, I'm going to stay with you, mainly because you're the youngest person here. And no. And the person who most recently actually completed assessments, correct? Okay. So if we believe that assessment drives behavior, maybe talk to us a little bit about that as a question, but then also try and weave in some responses to the whole notion of ethical concerns around it. But yeah.
Okay, very interesting question. So I wonder, and the example that you gave, Adish, about Wikipedia, I think when Wikipedia came out, I wonder if, probably I wouldn't even say I wonder, I think the question of plagiarism was at the forefront. And I think people had to think about, should we now require plagiarism declarations on all of our reports? And that's actually what has in fact happened. I think any long form report that we require our students to hand in, there has to be some kind of plagiarism declaration or plagiarism. But on that point, I think what we've actually done in our department is we've created an AI declaration that goes hand in hand with a plagiarism declaration. And I think the advantages of this are twofold, because number one, it enforces that accountability and transparency, and it enforces that little bit of academic integrity where you have to state that yes, I've used AI, or no, I've not used AI. And by the way, we didn't say that they're not allowed to use AI. We absolutely allowed them to use AI, but number one, they had to state it, and number two, if they'd used it, they need to give us a little bit of a paragraph as to what it is they actually used it for. We went a little bit of back and forth about should we actually ask them about the exact prompts, but I think that could get a bit long-winded. So it was more just of a very brief description of how you used it, and we had some very interesting responses. So some students mentioned that they used it to tidy up their writing, as you said, or interpret questions that they didn't fully understand. And I think those are excellent applications of AI. But what was then a little bit concerning was some students said, I used it to get the boiling point of a particular material, or I used it to get the chemical composition of something, which then delves into that realm of you're now using AI for facts as an encyclopedia or some kind of oracle. So I think it's been extremely beneficial for us to have that AI declaration alongside the plagiarism declaration, because, like I said, it not only helps with that academic integrity, but that is then data that we can gather and then assess. What is it that our students are actually using these tools for? And where do we potentially need to intervene and help our students use these tools better?
Thank you. Shannon?
Thanks. I think we're in really early stages when it comes to the conversations about ethics and AI. So I think similarly, we, on most plagiarism declarations now across the faculty, we have students commenting on AI. We've been very careful to make sure that course outlines make expectations clear for students, because I think practices differ really widely, not just across faculties, but within departments as to what's allowable and what isn't, which makes it very hard for students. So I think being very explicit is massively necessary. But more than that, I think we also have an opportunity in assessment to think with our students about what is ethical and to use it as a space for sort of, for developing an ethical practice more broadly around it, but B, also for developing critical literacies. So getting students to produce something via ChatGPT and then pull it apart themselves and look at it and see where is this and how is that fitting in. And those sorts of engagements allow us to have a deeper conversation about ethics and about how knowledge is made and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay, Michelle?
Have I not spoken already?
No. No. Ethical concerns.
Yes. I am not. I think it's a very deep subject, the ethical concerns, and we are always worried about that in computer science. I do think, and I'm thinking about humanities now, is that if we tell the students that AI is like the unreliable narrator, and we emphasize that, because I think that aspect, and then go through examples of how plausible this is, that could be very useful. Honestly, I haven't really delved into the deeper ethics of AI, because I think, if we get down to the singularity, it's going to be really complicated with our robot overlords, and that's what computer scientists, if they're really in philosophy, are worrying about. It's not about teaching; it's about what do we do when they're cleverer than us. So that's actually where the ethical debate ends up. I'm very much on the cold face of worrying about how do I stop people cheating. And it's not actually, I've realized that cheating is very much a product of how stressed people are when they're desperate. And if they're going to fail the course, 90% of students will find a way of not failing the course. And it's hard to be very judgmental about that, but you have to not allow it. So that for me is sort of don't put them in a situation where they can, don't put temptation too close. So that's why we have closed pracs and things like that. But then the closed pracs have an ethical issue in that you really are stressing out students a lot, and some of them handle it well, and others temperamentally do not handle closed pracs at all well. And it's almost like a torture. So I have ethical concerns about how we adapt to AI and how that impacts on the students' experience of extreme stress for computer science. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. Now you've got us worrying about the robots as well. Thanks. Yeah, Adish.
So I think my colleagues have said a lot of it. We've also, implemented the statement around AI usage, etc. So I think let me then add to the conversation and say, well, one of the things that we also need to be thinking about is why are we also looking at the ethical use of AI within our curricula, within our teaching and learning? And the simple reason is because what do students do when they get out of here? how do they ethically use AI. And I've got a student currently looking at the ethical use of AI within a call center environment. And there's interesting things that we don't think about. So, for example, within the Global South, do you implement AI, let's say a chatbot that is indiscernible from a human being without informing your client? Is that ethical? Is it unethical? So those type of questions, and those are the questions we also want. And I think it's really good that us as educators, us as within higher education, are asking these questions, but also getting our students to ask the questions themselves, to go, why are we doing this? Are we looking at the ethics around it just so that I don't cheat on my essay? Or is it to actually learn further from that this is something that I'm going to be using as part of my daily life going forward? How do I ethically use it?
Yeah, I think that's really key. I was going to ask if anybody wanted to pick up on that.
Well, I just had a thought, actually, that, centering pracs around validation of their, how do I tell if it's telling the truth, is actually a thought for me for next year as well. But that's actually quite an interesting use of ethical AI. How do I know if I'm being lied to? How can I check the veracity of this code for computer science or of the statements? How does one, because that's actually a key problem that I have with students, is they don't understand validation. Particularly, second, third year, that's where we're trying to get them to. How do you know that what you've said is true? You can make these claims. How do you justify it? That's quite a high-level way of thinking. So if we can teach that with AI at the early stages, I think we'd be winning.
Yeah. Shannon, just thinking about that and thinking about how we prepare our students for the world of work, which is what you've touched on already.
Yeah, the world of work, but also I think what we need to prepare ourselves for is the students who are now coming to us out of school are also going to have been using AI in different ways than our current generation of students. So it's a tricky position being in tertiary education, because you're actually between two systems, and so your students come in a particular way, and then you're sending them out to the world in a particular way, and at the same time training them to be researchers in case they want to stay in this world. So there are sort of so many things to juggle. But in terms, I think the central questions are to do with the fact that boundary policing almost, or trying, we can't stop this from happening. And I think the knee-jerk reaction in the very beginning was, oh my goodness, let's have closed tuts, let's do it in a way that just doesn't affect our world. But it's unfair to students to do that, because they're going to be coming into our system having used it in a particular way in schools that was ethically allowed there, and they're going to be going out into a world in which it's a calculator now, or it's Google now. It's not the big scary thing that we all know it is in many ways. And so they're very difficult questions, and I don't think we have answers. But in a way, we are in the most difficult position of all, because actually we are positioned in the place where we're needing to prepare our students for that. And so we need to find the answers somehow. And it's probably as a community, through ethical conversations and figuring out all of those very, very hard things.
Indeed. Did you have anything to add to that? In particular,
maybe just one small thing, and that's, I think as you mentioned, it is a very difficult, these are difficult questions, and there aren't easy answers, if there are answers at all. But I don't think it's something that we can approach top down and just try and ideate all of these answers ourselves and then apply it onto our students. This is definitely something that we're going to work with the students to try and figure out. So it's going to require collaboration. It's going to require a lot of iteration, and eventually we'll get to something that works.
Indeed. Okay, so Michelle, any last bits of advice for either those who are terrified by this growth of generative AI, or those who are excited? What are your bits of advice?
I think I'm going to add what Shannon has said. I have a name problem, sorry. I think we need to embrace it, and I think we need to be creative. And it is, unfortunately, it's more work. We can't just keep we can't be reiterating courses that ran. They're going to have to evolve. But I really think we're going to have to be creative and agile the way we handle this, and adaptive and evaluate every year, because it's moving very fast. I have to say about the school thing, I'm not sure schools have embraced it. My daughter discovered the advantages of ChatGPT because the school was saying, she's a matric now, but the school was so emphatic about how they can't use this. She was like, this must be quite useful. So, the students reacted, and it was quite interesting watching her. I mean, she does use it, but, they're going to use it. But I'm not sure the schools are ahead in that sense. They're more like also fearful. So I think we need to ignore the fear.
Nice one. Adish?
I think a nice point you bring up, because I was in school during the apartheid regime. And so one of the things we were forced to learn coming from KZN was Afrikaans, which was absolutely useless in KZN especially. And I still remember our Afrikaans teacher telling us once this concept of avoidance strategy. And it's, if we don't understand it, if it scares us, we avoid it. Students do it, we do it, and that's exactly what schools are doing. It's like, this is a big, scary thing, and we know people have said, even if they haven't tried it themselves, but people have said that it can be used for cheating, so don't use it. And that's exactly the thinking we need to avoid. I think I've spoken quite philosophically through most of this, so let me just look at the sort of practical side. The first thing is just to kind of reiterate what we were talking about. Mainly right now, and this will evolve as the machine learning gets better and better, but right now it's very much garbage in, garbage out. So whatever the students put in, whatever we put in, that's the valuable component. And it's interesting that you now have a new job that's starting to emerge, which is an AI, what is it called? It's like an AI prompter. Yeah, an AI prompter. It's a new job that's been created. So it's actually become a skill, that you get the right input. And so we can obviously use that almost to our advantage. And someone mentioned the whole thing about, okay, so let's look at the fallacies that are coming out in the classroom environment, in an assessment environment. Look at what comes out of ChatGPT. Ask our students to go and interrogate it. Ask our students to really critically analyze it, because that's what we're after, right? And whether they say, yes, this was actually spot on, or here's the gaps, and here's why there's gaps, et cetera, et cetera. It's that learning experience around critical thinking for me. So.
So I think I'll echo what Adisha said. And there's an old saying that we only really fear what we don't understand. So I think if you are fearful, the good news is because ChatGPT and these tools have become so popular, there's quite a lot of resources out there that are going into understanding what these tools are doing, and what it's good for and what it's bad for. But I think instead of being fearful, we should change that slightly to being cautious. It's a subtle change, but it's a very important change, because when you're fearful, that can often lead to resistance, missed opportunities, and has a lot of negative connotations associated with it. But if you're cautious, usually you'd rather take a step back, you try and assess what it is that's actually happening, and then try and strategically actually try and tackle it and move forward.
Thank you. Last word. Thanks, Shannon.
I think to just pick up on the notion of collaboration. So I think there are many people who are very worried about this, but the point is that everybody who is an educator is engaging with it in a particular way, or needs to be engaging with it in a particular way, which means a lot of the work has already been done. And there are resources that we can draw on. At UCT, we have the SILT guides, which are massively useful for thinking through how do we embrace this creatively, how do we proceed with caution in a way that creates sort of ethical ethical academic citizens, and that we don't need to do it by ourselves, that we've all been thinking together around this, and that helps a lot.
Sorry, just on that note, just to add, can I please give a very big shout out to Sukaina to say thank you for all the amazing interventions you've done around AI. She's actually the main reason we're sitting here today having these discussions. So thank you for being the forefront of a very scary machine.
Yes, definitely. I want to echo that. Sukaina was instrumental in getting our panel going and kind of framing our questions around that. Guys, I hope you've been, I hope your mind has been not settled, actually. I hope your mind's been unsettled by our conversation, because I think it's really something, as our panel have said, that we need to be grappling with, not running away from. We need to be understanding the benefits of generative AI and also some of the concerns, especially around ethics. And that points us to the need for assessments that really attempt to do what it is we say we do when we set out to teach our students. So thank you very much, panel. It's been wonderful being with you this morning.